So hello there and welcome to another episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Once again, my name is Adam Burns, one of your co-hosts, and joining me on this episode once again is Mr. Courtney Pine. Courtney, how are you doing this week? You all good?
Yeah, good evening everyone. Yeah, can't complain yet again. Things are still slowly but surely improving. It's taking off day by day, mate.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And also joining us this week, once again, a fan favourite, or so he proclaims himself to be, but he's on again once nonetheless. It's Luke joining us as well. So Luke, how are you doing?
I'm alright, thank you, Adam. Hi, Courtney, how you doing? Good evening, everyone.
So starting off with the preview for the British Grand Prix, of course, we've had our first weekend without Formula One since the season has returned to us following the COVID pandemic, and it's almost felt a little bit dreary, really. Almost used to seeing Formula One on a regular basis all of a sudden. The season's well underway. We've already got the major talking points coming at us. But yeah, a little bit of a lull this weekend, but obviously now that's passed, we're up to our next double header, which will be, or triple header in some cases, but the first of which will be the first of two races at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix this weekend. So guys, Courtney, are we looking forward to this race?
Yeah, it's going to be a shame that I think this is going to be the first real race where the crowd will be missed, because Silverstone is always known, particularly when a British driver does well, it's very much known for having like a fantastic atmosphere, and I do believe it. Yeah, it's going to be the first race where the crowd will be missed.
Well, I will say for one thing's for sure, Courtney, is that at least this time, if Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton are having a battle to try and overtake each other, the director won't pan to the crowd as Lewis Hamilton's trying to retake Valtteri Bottas, as he did last season. When
I must say though, Silverstone is definitely one of my favourite tracks, not just because it's in Britain, but it's the ebb and the flow of the circuit always creates plenty of opportunities to overtake. If you have a look at the last few years, there's been some brilliant racing, so I expect the same this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And so for those of you that are sort of hearing any background noise, obviously at the moment we're sort of dealing with a temporary recording situation which might create a little bit of background noise, so do apologise for that. The microphone is pretty powerful, hence why you might hear some little bumps and that every now and then, but we'll persevere nonetheless. So moving on to the British Grand Prix, of course, it's a good point we mentioned Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, of course. As expected, Lewis Hamilton's probably going to be the red-hot favourite for this race. 6 times a winner, more than anyone else at Silverstone. Absolutely loves this circuit, and with Mercedes as formidable as they are at the moment, it's very hard to look past a winner in one of those two cars, either Lewis Hamilton or Valtteri Bottas. And obviously, Lewis taking the lead of the Drivers' Championship for the first time this season after 2 dominating performances in the Styrian Grand Prix and the Hungarian Grand Prix respectively. So I'm going to come to you first, Luke. Do you think there is anyone else out that not driving a Mercedes that could stop Mercedes from dominating at their local track, or do you feel that Mercedes are going to potentially run away with this 1 and 2 again?
Yeah, I think it's going to be 1-2, and in my opinion, again, it's going to be Lewis in front of Valtteri. I mean, obviously, as you've pointed out earlier, Lewis is very, very dominant in Silverstone. He's won there 6 times. He's obviously a British driver. He's going to love it even more. Unfortunately, he's not going to have the crowd there to obviously guide him along the way, but I'm still adamant that Lewis will get the job done very comfortably. And just quickly before I forget, I remember over the years where at Silverstone, even though we're not going to have the crowd there, I think the TV rights are going to be loving it, because usually on the same day, Wimbledon finals usually on that day, and also there's another event that they usually have on that day as well. So
wasn't it last year was the World Cup final, wasn't it?
It was the World Cup final and the Wimbledon final. So obviously, yeah, it's going to be hopefully a lot more viewings for the British Grand Prix. But just going back to what about Lewis, yeah, I think he's going to be very dominant this weekend again.
Yeah, so just to clarify, obviously the World Cup, we're talking about the Cricket World Cup there. England, if you're listening abroad, obviously we're all English here, and we were very happy to see England win that one-day World Cup in cricket in dramatic fashion in that super over, with Ben Stokes being one of the heroes in that event. But coming back to Formula One, of course, yes, you're absolutely right to point that out. The TV audience is going to be glued to the Formula One. Obviously, it's FA Cup final weekend as well, but that's going to be on the Saturday. So the Sunday race is literally going to have free reigns where all the global attention is going to be on that, which is great to see. Of course, as we've also mentioned, there won't be any fans at this event for the first time in probably since the British Grand Prix began many, many years ago. And it's such a shame. I mean, famous cliche phrase from Nigel Mansell. He often said that the British Grand Prix driving in front of a packed crowd at Silverstone with the crowd cheering you on is almost worth a few tenths of a second a lap. And that's absolutely pivotal in a championship fight that we expect to happen between Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas once again. We expect that to be decided by a very few tenths. We've seen Valtteri's pace has been relatively good compared to previous seasons in qualifying, at least. He's on Lewis's, if you like, somewhat his level. Not quite there yet. Lewis always seems to be able to extract that little bit extra. But on home turf, do we expect Lewis to miss the crowd too much, or do we reckon he'll be able to just dial it in and do what he often does so well, Courtney?
I think, yeah, he's at that point now where, you know, he's achieved so much, and I don't think it always gives him a little bit of a lift, particularly, you know, when it's close against other teams. But he's got such a dominant car. He's confident that he can beat Valtteri. He's done it, three times in a row already. I honestly do believe that the only thing that can really beat Lewis Hamilton this weekend is Lewis Hamilton if he goes in a bit too complacent.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis, it's funny with Lewis because he's one of the great sportsmen across all sports that doesn't have many off days. In Formula One, obviously, you know, it's an environment where drivers aren't really allowed to have off days, especially when you're under pressure. You're always judged on your most recent performance. But in Lewis's case, when he has a bad day, he has a bad day. And I think in some regards, you could even argue, despite coming fourth, Austria was considered a bad day, the opening race of the season. How everything just seemed to unfold in the worst way for him. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, despite the fact that it was still relatively quick. But I think that's a good point to point out. Do we expect much resistance from Valtteri Bottas? I think he dominated in Austria to a large degree. I think it's fair to say Bottas had that nailed on, despite the problems he was nursing. We never really got to see if Hamilton could trouble Bottas, given the penalties and incidents he was involved in. But since then, Bottas has lacked that something that we've quite often said about him that separates him from someone like the level of Lewis Hamilton. And with respect to Valtteri Bottas, of course, we should remember that we're talking about arguably one of the very best drivers that's ever sat in a Formula One cockpit that we're comparing him to. So it's a very, very difficult mantle to match up to. Do we think Valtteri Bottas can reignite already his season after two races, particularly in Austria as well, where he was a little bit out of form, if you like, if that's fair for me to say, perhaps a little bit off his absolute best? Do we think he can turn it around at this weekend's British Grand Prix?
I think obviously the car will help him. You know, he's got within the Mercedes, of course, he's going to stay alongside Hamilton for, you know, hopefully for his case, long periods in the race. And obviously in qualifying, we've seen that his pace is very good. I've always said that, you know, Lewis over the course of qualifying is the best one lap driver out there. But of course, Valtteri Bottas can, in my opinion, reignite his, you know, challenge. You know, he's lost his lead in the championship, which is not going to be good for him. But I think he should be really positive and really confident he can get a result this weekend. That's obviously good for him and the team. But I just feel that Lewis is going to be a lot stronger, you know, this weekend, especially in Britain. But you never know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I feel that I don't want to sound arrogant because obviously I'm a known Lewis Hamilton fan. I think if you used to take aside possible race incidents or reliability, I think Lewis should have this season nailed, because let's not forget that Max Verstappen has been getting everything out of that Red Bull, outperforming the car massively. And I just get the impression that when Red Bull are close enough to Mercedes, I just get the feeling that Max is going to be taking points off, a lot more points off Valtteri than he will be Lewis. And I think Max Verstappen's actually going to be a big factor in deciding who wins the championship.
Yeah, he could well be. Max, as we saw in the Hungarian Grand Prix, he can turn around a disappointing qualifying performance for Red Bull, and the pre-race incident that he had where he almost took himself out of the race before the start, into a performance that, you know, beggars belief at how he's able to drag a car like that, the way the Red Bull is at the moment, and put it into a position where he was keeping Lewis honest at very minimum for most parts of that race, and obviously coming second, crucially finishing ahead of Valtteri Bottas. And you're absolutely right to point that out, where Max can have an influence on this championship, where if one Mercedes is not performing, Max will be there to take advantage. And that's the best that we can hope for, I suppose, this season, given how dominant Mercedes are. Given the nature of the British Grand Prix, it's a very abrasive circuit, although it is very much in the high-speed category. Certainly going to favour the teams that have the better engine, i.e. Mercedes plays straight to their trump cards, if you like. So it's probably fair to point out that it could be another potentially difficult weekend for Red Bull, who, by and large, have, I suppose, a little bit disappointed the F1 fans in terms of the expectations and what they'd shown in testing compared to their actual race performance at the moment. But do we feel that Red Bull can turn it around this weekend? And if not, do we think that they can get on top of their issues at a reasonable point before Mercedes run away with this championship?
I can't see them closing the. I think I mentioned this last week. I just can't see that size of a gap getting closed fast enough for them to catch up in terms of points. Like, it could get to the point where, you know, we saw it with Ferrari last season, where they had races where they were the fastest. That, you know, Ferrari went through a phase. I think it was two, maybe three races back-to-back wins.
Yes.
But by that point, they were so far behind in the championship. You know, yeah, it made for more entertaining races, but the championship itself was pretty much settled by then. And I think that could be the point again this season. I think the only factor that could play into the championship itself is Max. I don't think Red Bull will catch up fast enough.
Yeah, and I think it's important that Red Bull trying to get on top of these issues. Obviously, we talked about in great detail in the last episode how we felt that George Russell, the Williams driver, was right in his comments that they were making Alex Albon out to be a bit like an idiot, really, or made a bit of a fool, given the poor showing that he had in qualifying, where the team put him out in difficult circumstances with traffic and he wasn't able to extract the pace. Yet his race performance moved him all the way up into fifth, only finishing behind Bottas, Stroll, Verstappen and Lewis, shows that there's a lot more coming from their drivers at the moment than the car is. So Red Bull certainly need to get on top of this, and unfortunately at a track like Silverstone, I just feel on the same wavelength as you guys that this is going to be a track that's going to play to Mercedes' strengths, and perhaps the biggest threat to them this weekend is going to come from the racing points again, rather than the Red Bulls or even the Ferraris at a push. So
the weather always plays a part in Silverstone, though, doesn't it? Like, it wouldn't surprise me if we see changeable conditions again this weekend, so that could play a part.
It could well do, but I think we've got to bear in mind as well that we've already seen changeable conditions in 2 Grand Prix this season already.
Yeah.
By and large, Mercedes have absolutely dominated the conditions, and in particular Lewis Hamilton, of course.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. Look, for me with Lewis again, it doesn't matter what condition it is. Yeah, I just feel, I don't want to keep saying it, I just feel over this weekend he's going to dominate. And it doesn't matter what the dry or wet condition, as we mentioned, and as you said, Courtney, earlier, the only thing that's going to stop Hamilton from winning this race is him himself. So
yeah, no, that's a good point. So yeah, I think we've given up. So, well, actually, no, I'm going to put you on the spot. Actually, why not? It should be a bit easier, I imagine, where you guys are going to go with this. But I'm going to put you on the spot in who you think is going to win the Grand Prix this weekend. So I'll start with you, Luke. Who do you think is going to win?
Sebastian Vettel. No, Lewis Hamilton. I think he's going to win both whilst at Silverstone, but this weekend, yeah, I'm going to go for a Mercedes 1-2, Lewis at the front, Bottas second, and I'm going to go for Sergio Perez to finish third.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Lewis.
Not Vettel.
I think. Well, you never know. Can you imagine though? If you you could actually play this clip if Sebastian goes on to win this Grand Prix. I actually kind of hope it happens now.
Remember, I said it.
Well, I mean, let's be honest, guys. I don't think it could be much worse than what he did last year, driving into the back of Verstappen and punting him off at the exit into Club and Vale.
That was a meme-worthy moment.
Yeah, very much
Did
was.
you think it was a blue flag or something, maybe?
Well, maybe he was trying to recreate Ricciardo Verstappen in Baku all them years ago for Red Bull, and he just thought, I'll have some of that. But, yeah, so Courtney, sorry, you were saying?
So, I'm going to go with Lewis. I think even in past years, particularly at Silverstone, even if Valtteri beats him in qualifying, there's plenty of opportunities to overtake a Silverstone. So I'm going to go with, Lewis first, Valtteri second, and I think Max is going to bring the performance out of that Red Bull again and get another podium.
That's an interesting shout. As I said, I think Red Bull have got a lot of head scratching to do regarding their car. For whatever reason, it's just not delivering the performance that they want. We know that Mercedes have made huge gains on their engine over the winter break from last season, hence why another reason why they've been so dominant. And I think that's going to play to their strengths. And because of that, I'm going to go the same as Luke on this one for the top three. I'm going to go with Hamilton to win, Bottas second, and Sergio Perez to come third, with Lance Stroll, I think, will come in fourth place as well. Enlarge has done relatively well, I suppose, this season, and I think he's going to continue that. So a real head scratcher for Racing Point there because of the contract situation with Perez. I think it's a couple more days now to exercise a clause in Perez's contract to make sure they retain him, and they haven't done that yet. So obviously fueling the rumours about Sebastian Vettel. But of course, we're not going to go into that too much. We've already spoke of that a lot already.
I was just going to mention, Courtney, I think the only thing Verstappen's going to do this weekend, he may win Driver of the Day, but apart from that, I don't think he's going to win anything else.
Yeah, he often wins Driver of the Day. I wonder why.
Yeah, he seems to like that one, but that's obviously a fan poll as well, so that does tend to vary. But anyway, let's move on. Of course, we mentioned them a little bit earlier, and a team that we expect probably to have another difficult weekend after a very disappointing season so far, and that is Ferrari. Now, obviously, news has come out over the weekend that Ferrari were going to restructure. We heard rumours about senior management being involved and what that meant, and normally, Courtney, when that happens, it usually means the technical director or the team principal is literally laying on the chopping block waiting for the guillotine to put them out of their misery. This time, though, that hasn't happened. Ferrari have gone a more pragmatic route. They've been very open and honest about their flaws. I mean, let's be honest, there's no way they could put a red veil over it like they have in the past and expect everything to be okay. They literally have nowhere to hide. And the press release that came out from Ferrari directly goes as follows. So, Scuderia Ferrari Mission Winner has restructured its technical department to render it more effective and assure a more holistic emphasis on performance development. This has been achieved by instituting a chain of command that is more focused and simplified and provides the heads of each department the necessary powers to achieve their objectives. To this end, it has also been established that a new performance development department will be headed up by Enrico Cardil, and of course supported in large by Diego Sanchez and Rory Byrne. Now, those two names, for you more veteran Formula One fans, will ring a lot of bells in a good way. Now, to put it in this context for some newer Formula One fans, Rory Byrne and Diego Sanchez were heavily involved in the success, particularly Rory Byrne, were heavily involved in the success of Ferrari in their glory days when Ross Brawn, Jean Todt, Michael Schumacher, that little holy trinity that Ferrari had, where they dominated for 6 years from 1999 to 2004, culminating in 6 Constructors and 5 Driver World Championships respectively. So first things first, a huge surprise from Ferrari when as we said before, Corny, in normal circumstances when these things happen, it doesn't make good reading to their team bosses. In the past, we've seen Marco Mattiacci, who brought Sebastian Vettel to Ferrari. Obviously, he was sacked not long after Vettel was signed. Stefano Domenicali was unsuccessful during the Alonso years, of course, in the early 2010s. And, of course, more recently, Maurizio Arrivabene, who arguably had the best Ferrari car that he was running for 2 years in 2017 and 18, and proved unsuccessful on both occasions and was replaced by now Mattia Binotto. So what do you make of this press release from Ferrari, this new structure that they've talked about putting into place? Do you think this is the right move for Ferrari going forward, or do you feel perhaps this is just a popularity or a publicity stunt to try and get people on board whilst they invoke a plan that perhaps isn't going to come through like many others in the past?
I mean, with Ferrari, it's good they're taking a change of approach, because it's definitely well needed. But just give my perspective as a neutral. Look, I could be wrong. I could well be wrong. But in the past, 12 years since they last won a championship, be it a constructors, there have been so many false dawns at Ferrari. So at this point, again, it could be proven wrong. At this point, I can't help but feel sceptical, because we've been in this position like repeatedly in the past few years. So hopefully, for the sake of Formula One, you need Ferrari up there, as we discussed last week. You need Ferrari up there. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit sceptical, but maybe this change of approach might reap different results for Ferrari.
I mean, what this essentially does, from what I've read from this press release, I mean, just to clarify, people are wondering about other areas like the engine or the chassis or trackside activities. Those haven't changed. Those areas are still, led by Enrico Gualtieri in charge of the power unit, Lauren Makes, the sporting director in charge of trackside activities, and of course Simon Resta, who Ferrari brought in from Alfa Romeo a few seasons ago, who was quite instrumental in back then Sauber's progress in 2016, 2017. And obviously he's back at Ferrari. He's going to continue in the chassis engineering department. So effectively what Ferrari have done is they've addressed this issue where they've had a lack of a technical director since Mattia Binotto has assumed the role of team principal. And they've basically put in a new, if you like, quality control department. They've called it the performance development department, but it's basically quality control underneath Mattia Binotto, to basically be led by David Sanchez and Rory Byrne, to make sure that the aero, the engine, the chassis, everything goes through them. They're going to be leading the projects to some degree, and they're going to make sure that Ferrari now, when they get new parts to their car or new changes or new designs on the new cars that will come out, those are going to be the best they possibly can be. Because quite often in the past, Corny, we've always seen Ferrari make mistakes in their car design or their development for loads and loads of reasons, and there's usually a few pieces they put out to kind of defend this or to give excuses, i.e., for example, the correlation between the wind tunnel data and the track data just doesn't seem to match up. There's always variations to a large degree. Now, of course, we should stress every team does go through that, but no one seems to have as much of a gulf in their correlation, their data between the track and the wind tunnel than Ferrari. I think that's probably fair to say.
It would suggest a communication issue, really, wouldn't it?
In large, I would say so. And I think it's important why perhaps naming Rory Byrne as one of the leading protagonists on this project is more than just a smokescreen to cover for Ferrari's shortcomings, to kind of get people on side. And I believe that in the past, we've seen how influential, in particular, Rory Byrne was for Ferrari, and how instrumental he was with the aero design. Now, of course, it's been widely rumoured and reported that Rory Byrne was heavily influential towards the design of the 2017 car, the SF70H. Yeah, and was heavily influential on the 2018 car that should have won the World Championship. And, of course, the sidepod design. The famous sidepod design that Ferrari brought out in 2017 that is now pretty much on every single car since. So to have him in particular more involved on this car, I believe it's more than just a publicity stunt. I feel that Ferrari have seriously addressed these issues of trying to chase success in the short term and are now perhaps planning for the long term goal of achieving success over a long period of time in Formula One, a new era, if you like. And John Elkann, who is one of the chairman at Ferrari, along with Louis Camilleri, he has basically gone out and responded to this by saying that he does not expect Ferrari to become or return to race-winning, championship-winning form until at least 2022, when the new rules and regulations are coming in. And that is quite a worrying sign for Ferrari fans in the short term. Basically, that's suggesting what we probably thought was going to happen anyway, that because of the limitations placed on the regulations of 2021 and that car development was going to be very difficult with the lack of tokens available for development, it almost felt like these cars were going to participate in a 2-season championship rather than a 1-season championship, if you like. So Ferrari going for the long-term approach is something they haven't really done that often. It's a very pragmatic approach, very open and honest approach from them, bit refreshing considering what we're used to from Ferrari. But do we think this is going to pay off? Do you think what Ferrari have implemented at this point, Courtney, do you think that that's going to warrant and provide results in the future in the same way perhaps Mercedes have done? Or do you feel that this is just another smokescreen?
I do think they, like as I said earlier, they definitely need to change the approach. It's good because that's what Mercedes did for 2014. They put a lot of development, for a lot of years worth of development into the change in regulations. But the problem is, and the problem that every other team has, well, they've had the past, how many years now? 6, 7 years? Is that Mercedes have been so dominant that they're probably in a position now where they might be thinking about putting resources into 2022. That's the problem that every other team has. Mercedes have been so dominant, they probably have a similar mindset to Ferrari right now. It is a possibility, and I know every neutral F1 fan doesn't want to be hearing that, but unless there are big changes at Mercedes and all falls apart with their management, I'd be very surprised to see them overthrown even in 2022 because they're so far ahead at this point.
Yeah, and this is important to note that because obviously we've got a massive overhaul in regulations, the largest of its kind since 2009, following the economic crisis, and there's a lot of pressure on teams to deliver some level of change in the pecking order where it doesn't allow Mercedes to continue their domination, which stretches back to 2014, as we said. And in a way, what this has done, if Ferrari are correct and that they don't become a race-winning, championship potentially winning team until 2022, does two things. It puts a lot of pressure on Red Bull because now they are probably the only team, in my mind, that can now challenge Mercedes for those 2 seasons. Racing Point, as good as they've been, they're using effectively last year's Mercedes. As quick as that is, it's not going to be faster than this year's Mercedes. We know that. I mean, if Mercedes started seeing Racing Point beat them on a regular basis, they'd probably revert to their old car and see if that they can match themselves up, all jokes aside.
Imagine Ferrari could do that as well.
Well, and this is the thing because a lot of people thought, a lot of people thought
you put a few temps there.
Yeah, a lot of people thought. Well, I was thinking that should they run last year's Ferrari because they're very heavily dragged. Like all pun aside, they're very heavily bogged down by the drag coefficient in their current car, and I think it's important to talk about or mention at least that the engine issue Ferrari have had has hampered them massively because they designed this year's car with a lot of drag in mind because they wanted to be faster in the corners, assuming that they were going to have the engine that they planned to have for this season. But they haven't got that, so they've lost all that extra speed, and that's why they're so much slower in the speed traps. They've got a car that effectively handles better than last year's one, but they haven't got the extra power to counteract the extra drag. So they're kind of being hit with both barrels on this one. So it's a bold move from Ferrari, something refreshing, something different from what they'd normally do. as a Ferrari fan, for those of you that have listened to this know that I am, I think I'm at this point now where I think they have to try something as bold as this, because I feel like Plan A has not worked, and they've constantly trying to change the figurehead and the route that they've gone down in terms of how to achieve goals in the short term, and they always seem to come up against the same issue. And if anything, over time they regress the more they change things. So hopefully this will warrant better results in the future. But I believe from what John Elkann has said, the target is more likely going to be Red Bull and Racing Point rather than Mercedes. I never thought I'd say that anytime soon, that Racing Point would be the target rather than Mercedes. But that's the reality Ferrari find themselves in right now. So difficult times ahead, and they've certainly got the people there to make that happen. But there's going to be a lot of emphasis and a lot of pressure for them to deliver.
May I just say that 10 minutes you've just explained all of that was beautiful.
Well, I hope
I've had like I just feel for the situation that Ferrari are a little bit desperate at the moment, that they're trying to revert back to obviously where they were successful. I mean, obviously where Mercedes have got so much more dominant. But I mean, obviously, yeah, I don't know too much about the subject, but from what you've said from the last 5 to 10 minutes, that's either one, confused me even more, but two, it's obviously given us a bit much more of an understanding of what's actually going on behind the scenes at Ferrari.
Well, I'm going to take that as a positive endorsement, even though it might not have sounded like it at
Listen,
past.
I like Ferrari in the midfield battle. You know,
But
we have another 2 years of it. That's great. But we need them at the top.
The Formula One website bantered them on this and actually said who's going to win the midfield battle, and they included Ferrari in this, which, I mean, granted, is probably fair given at times they're the 5th or 6th fastest car on the grid, which is I've never seen a regression as quick as that in one season. Ferrari have had this problem before in the late 80s, early 90s, but that slowly happened over a few years. Never happened in 18 months or so quickly, or over one winter break, if you like.
Did they state a Ferrari car or a Ferrari engine that's going to win the midfield battle?
It was the car. I mean, I'm guessing they assumed the whole package, really. But nonetheless, anyway.
I must say, Adam, can I interrupt? I just had a thought. Something just dawned on me. I know why Luke wants to see Ferrari in a midfield battle.
Why is that?
He wants to see Vettel come up against Kvyat again.
Oh, I can't. Well, I love it.
Yeah.
Listen, the Styria, was it Styria or Austria? Was it Austria? It was the Austrian Grand Prix. Of course, it was. I mean, when, that moment when the torpedo, like, it just came back to me. When Vettel took Kvyat out, and it was refreshing.
Well, I mean, he didn't take Kvyat out, so to speak. He sort of
In
pulled
his mind,
he sort of pulled across him and gave him literally no room to try and get back at him. And I'll be honest, it did feel like Vettel enjoyed that one, especially after, as I
Magnussen
said,
and Hulkenberg all over again.
No. I mean, newer F1 fans probably won't remember, but obviously backdating to 2016, where Kvyat in back-to-back races, the torpedo moment in China, and then of course driving into the back of Vettel twice in the Russian Grand Prix, taking Vettel out, which of course subsequently resulted in Kvyat losing his seat to Max Verstappen, and the rest is history since then. But obviously that aside now, I think this is a good opportunity to take a break, and for those of you that are still with us after this lengthy chat, we'll be happy to know that the second part is not going to be as long, but we will see you in the second part of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Welcome back to the second part of the DNF1 F1 podcast. So obviously, just to recap from part one, we were talking about the British Grand Prix preview and, of course, the changes that have gone on in Ferrari and what we thought about that. Whilst we have you here, guys, of course, I forgot to do this in part one, but I'm going to do it now. For those of you that don't know, last week we released our first proper video that we've made. Of course, we put these podcasts up on YouTube, but our first actual video, the beginner's guide to Formula One from DNF1, of course, from us. And for those of you that haven't seen it, I definitely recommend that you check it out. It's on the YouTube channel, DNF1 F1 podcast. Make sure to type that in and make sure to like, share and subscribe. It's doing rather well, but of course, we always appreciate more support, and obviously mention what you can to us in the comment section. Let us know what you think. It's a great little guide to basically explain some of the basics and some of the important things in a nice, concise and fun manner, unlike our podcasts usually are, on how the Formula One weekend normally works and what to look out for if you're a new fan to the sport and if you want to enjoy Formula One. So make sure to check that out, and of course let us know what you think. And of course it's worth mentioning that our part 2 video, for those of you that have seen part 1, you'll be interested to know that we plan for that one to go live next Friday, the, trying to remember my dates right, the 7th of August, prior to the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, which will be the second race at Silverstone next Friday. So make sure, if you haven't already, to like and subscribe to the channel as well. It really helps us out. And of course, if you continue to support us, guys, as you've so often done, it will allow us to make more great content for you lot. So, shameless plug aside, let's move on to the final point of discussion for this week's podcast episode, and that's the news that we've got 3 new circuits added to the Formula 1 calendar. So, some exciting news, of course. We've had some other races added on. We had Mugello and, of course, the Sochi race in Russia coming up very, very soon. But, of course, we've got 3 new races, 2 of which some old favourites and a new race as well. So we'll start off with the first race. It's going to be at the Nurburgring for what will probably be the German Grand Prix on the weekend of the 9th to 11th of October. So that will be there instead of a race at Hockenheim. There'll be no race at Hockenheim this season, which is a bit disappointing, but the Nürburgring is certainly a worthy replacement to that. And then, of course, we've got the second race of this 3 that have been announced on the weekend of the 23rd to 25th of October. Will be in Portimao in Portugal. We mentioned this on a previous podcast episode not too long ago, that I felt that a Portimao race was going to happen. And in the Algarve region in Portugal, which is one of the least affected areas of COVID from looking at the data from what I've seen, a very, very good choice for a Formula 1 race. It's been pending for some time, and hopefully that's going to provide a good race. It'll be the first time Formula 1 has ever been to Portimao for a race. Normally in Portugal, they've often raced at Estoril, but we're going to be racing in Portimao, so that'll be interesting to see. And of course, finally, I think the one, Courtney, you and I in particular, veteran Formula 1 fans, are most excited about: the return of Imola, obviously for the 3rd Italian Grand Prix this season in the region of San Marino. For those who remember, the first time Imola will be on the Formula 1 calendar since 2006. So 14 years we've had to wait for another race. And I, for one, am absolutely excited about the prospect of coming back to Imola. Courtney, I don't know about you. What are your thoughts on the news about the new races?
As a fan of the sport, I just think it's important that you keep, the classic circuits, the big name circuits, shall we say. There should always be a Monaco, a Silverstone, a Monza, an Imola, a Spa. Those tracks should always be in an F1 calendar. I'm going to sound like an old man. I'm only 28. I'm not that old, but I generally don't like the new circuits. The runoff areas are too big. There's no gravel tracks. There probably won't be a gravel track. They'll probably change it around so there isn't a gravel track. But the old circuits, I just feel, just generate much better races. Silverstone's an example of that. So we need to be keeping these old circuits and bring back tracks like him. And I just think it'll just make F1 a better spectacle overall.
Well, the important thing is we want to make sure we're testing these drivers to their absolute limit. I mean, these guys are world class. They're the best 20 drivers of open wheel race cars in the world, in theory, on the grid, dueling it out. We want them to be challenged. We want there to be no forgiveness for mistakes, i.e., having these gravel traps rather than runoff areas. Of course, the old argument is runoff areas are safer because there's more room to run off to, rather than runoff areas and the grass and the gravel, which have been unsafe in the past. But of course, these circuits since have been made a lot safer. I mean, Imola in particular, very much shrouded in history, for good and for bad, of course. A circuit which has seen many good days for Ferrari in particular. Of course, another home circuit for them. They've got 3 now. They're literally running the championships, almost like the Ferrari World Series that we have with the Ferrari supercars. We're having that in Formula 1 this season. And of course, some darker days, of course, the scene of probably arguably the greatest loss in Formula 1 racing, the death of Ayrton Senna in 1994, which warranted massive changes to not just that circuit in terms of safety, but other circuits as well. From what I remember, I think, and don't quote me on this, because by the time we come around to November, that first week in November, when the Imola race will be, I believe the final corner, which used to be a chicane, that's now been changed to the long straight that they used to have before that was implemented in the early 90s. So I think that's the only difference. AlphaTauri team that did some testing earlier in the season, so they're going to have some data on that circuit. And of course, Ferrari will no doubt have data on that circuit from history. But it's a great race to have back. I'm very much looking forward to that. It was a brilliant circuit, and I think it's a good opportunity to talk about these last few races. So I'm just going to ask you guys, both of you guys, to give me, not so much with Portimao, because of course we haven't had a race in Portimao before, so it's very, very hard to reminisce on Formula 1 races on a circuit we've never been at before. But in terms of the Nurburgring and Imola, I want you guys to give me one each of your favourite moments, most memorable moments at both of those Grand Prix. So I'm going to start with Luke first. Luke, so for the Nurburgring, can you give me a memorable moment that sticks in your mind for that race, and one also for the Imola race as well that's memorable to you?
Just to quickly say, with the Nurburgring, growing up watching Formula 1 with yourself, it was always... I love the Nurburgring. I prefer that to Hockenheim. And I know Hockenheim's a great circuit, but for me, Nurburgring was always one of my favourites. But if I had to pick my favourite moment of Nurburgring, I would say the race in 2007. And the only reason why I love an underdog, I love the little minnows coming through. You know, we went to Spa in 2001 and we saw Rafael Marquez in the Minardi, and I just wanted him to win. Marquez. Yeah. And it was one of them things. And then just to see the little spiker of Marcus Winkelhock on his Formula 1 debut, leading a race, and I think you said this to me off air, like that 40% of his laps that he's had in Formula 1, he's actually been leading in his one race.
GOAT statistics, you can't argue with that.
Not
even Lewis Hamilton or Michael Schumacher has that level of
I was
greatness.
just going to say, the only other thing I can think that has better statistics in one race is not a race, is Sam Allardyce's England record as England manager, 1 game, 1 win. But it's, for me, that race, it had everything. The rain, the incidents. I think Lewis Hamilton was very, very lucky to get out of that incident. He went off the track at the start of turn 1.
Was that the race? Was that the race when like 6 or 7 cars went off on the same corner?
That was the one.
Yeah, and Lewis was one of them.
Jenson Button. Yeah, Button, Scott Speed. I think there was a few others. I can't remember the other drivers, but all I just saw was this orange car coming through, and it was Winkelhock, and everyone was expecting, just go around the safety car and unlap yourself. But it was only like lap 4 or lap 5, and he was winning. And I think Alonso won the race in the end. But just for that moment for me, the Nurburgring, that was my favourite year I've seen the Nurburgring race.
Yeah, to put it into context, guys, the reason Marcus Winkelhock in the Spiker, which was arguably the slowest car on the grid at the time, why he got to the front was the race started in dry conditions and rain was literally imminent. So everybody gambled on staying on the dry tyres, and if it rained, they put on the wet tyres. However, Winkelhock in the Spiker his team decided to put him on wet tyres, intermediates if you like. And all of a sudden, it started to rain, and he ended up finding himself at the front of the pack because everyone else had pitted, and he'd end up at the front. So that's how he got there. But of course, he was overtaken by Felipe Massa and Fernando Alonso, literally in the space of one back straight, really. They both got him into turn 1.
How the Ferrari engine got past him, I don't know.
Well, Spikers, I think... Were Spikers, weren't they running Ferrari engines?
I think
they
were.
They were. But those were the old Ferrari engines. Obviously, the rules have changed.
Engine they were running.
It probably was this year's Ferrari engine, yeah. They were ahead of the curve, and I was like, damn, we've got to get an engine quick. I see if Spiker is still using them old ones. We flogged them back in 2007. It was like the Toro Rossos as well in 2006, where they had to run the Rev Limited V10s when everyone went to V8s that season. But... those history lessons aside, of course, we could talk about it all day. Courtney, what about you? Memorable moments from Imola or Nurburgring?
I think with Imola, I would say, for bad reasons, as you already mentioned, the Senna incident. But it has to be Schumacher versus Alonso. I think that's one of the duels that really stands out in their rivalry. So whenever I think like Schumacher Alonso, I always think of that race in Imola.
Yeah, 2006 San Marino Grand Prix it was. Fernando Alonso, obviously defending world champion, against a resurgent Ferrari and Michael Schumacher, who were much, much more on the pace in that championship than they were the season before. And you're absolutely right to point out, it's one of the examples where we really saw a passing of the baton between Schumacher and Alonso. And there was a few moments in particular that season, of course, the memorable pass from Alonso and Schumacher into 130R in Japan in 2005, of course, the season before that, and other memorable moments as well. But it was one of the best pieces of defensive driving I think I'd ever seen from Fernando Alonso, to keep Michael Schumacher behind him, who was so much faster. He'd got ahead of him in the race, and it was just fantastic to see. A lot of respect and brilliance between two great champions. Anything for Nurburgring, Courtney, memories?
I think the main one was the one that Luke said, to be honest. I mean, in recent years, hasn't really been, because it hasn't really been, in recent years, it's mainly been at Hockenheim, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Hockenheim, it's a good circuit, but I miss the old one. I
Yeah.
really do. I mean, they've kind of nerfed it, and it's a good circuit all round, but there's just something about seeing a Formula 1 car going down
That's
a really
why-
long straight like that. And I think, could you imagine DRS on the old Hockenheim circuit?
Yeah,
It's just literally a slam dunk for a pass. Literally, it'd be like that the Indian Grand Prix, where they just literally pass each other back and forth until one eventually gets to the corner.
that's why I preferred Nurburgring. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, the races itself, of course, Hockenheim was great, but I did prefer the Hockenheim's old circuit compared to the new one. That's why I mentioned I did like the Nurburgring.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
It's
yeah,
just,
right.
if one good thing has come out of coronavirus, it's given us F1 nerds our proper tracks back.
We've been asking for a long time, and Formula One have been trying to champion this logistics program they have that we talked about in a previous podcast episode earlier in the season. Well, before the season started, obviously, that the prospect of having 25 races going from continent to continent to continent. This season, we've practically got a European Canada. I've heard stories about there's going to be no race in Austin this year, no race in Canada, Brazil, Mexico. Those races have been cancelled because of the COVID pandemic. We may not even get a race in Abu Dhabi. We know there's not going to be a Chinese race. There have been talks about other races. I imagine they might try and keep Abu Dhabi on the calendar as a season finale, but this is very much a European Canada.
Haven't they? I don't know where I read it, but it's probably Twitter. They say that it can't be considered an actual world championship unless races take place on 3 different continents.
Yeah, I had heard this. The reason why I think they've got around that is because the championship was originally planned to go over certain number of continents anyway, so it's kind of forced their hand as a de facto situation, but
Yeah.
like a pseudo world championship, but it's still going to be counting as a world championship. So for those of you that aren't Lewis Hamilton fans, thinking that one was going to be a little asterisk to say, oh well, Lewis ain't going to beat Schumacher's record because it's not a world championship, it's a European championship. Lewis has 6 world titles and a European one. I'm sorry guys to burst your bubble, that's not going to happen. So yeah, we'll put that one in the bin. It's definitely a world championship in all regards.
I just wanted to mention before I forgot about Imola. I didn't mention my favourite part of Imola. When you mentioned about the Schumacher Alonso pass the baton, it sort of brought back memories to 2004. Do you remember Schumacher had that little battle with Montoya?
Yes,
And
I think I know
just,
where you're going with
I
this.
mean, with Montoya, I saw a clip the other day. I totally forgot about it, and it was like, oh, it was blind or he didn't see me, and I was thinking to myself, no, like Schumacher knows he's coming to the end of his career. He's not going to pass the baton to you. So I think in 2006, it was like, look, Alonso is a much better and
That
reliable
incident,
driver.
that was there's
Who
getting
was at fault for me?
Oh, it's Schumacher. Schumacher should have given Montoya a round. So just to describe this incident, guys, if you haven't seen it, basically the San Marino Grand Prix, the hairpin corner, I think it was, trying to remember my turns right, but 1, 2, 3, 4, turn 6, I think it was, the hairpin. And Schumacher was on the inside, defending against Montoya, was trying to overtake him around the outside. And Schumacher on the exit's gone quite wide, and it's forced Montoya to go off the track. Now, for those of you fans of Formula 1 will recite Fernando Alonso, go, all the time, you have to leave the space, all the time. Schumacher did not leave Montoya any space. There's getting the shoulders out, and then there's trying to test your wingspan, and Schumacher was like, only one of us is making it up the hill, and it's not going to be you. And Montoya responded by saying in joke that next to Schumacher, of course, he was very ballsy by saying that you had to be either blind or stupid to not see me there, and everyone just kind of reacted like, oh, did he just say that? But Schumacher took it in all in good jest. That's just how it was between those two. They had that little rivalry where whenever the two of them got together since the 2001 Brazil Grand Prix, it
I
always
think
came to
F1
blows.
is missing a Montoya though.
Yeah.
We need a Montoya back in F1. You know,
A fiery
he was
calendar.
definitely a maverick.
Yeah, very much so. A fiery character, almost a bit volatile, too volatile for his liking. But I mean, we digress. I mean, me personally, I think the 2003 San Marino Grand Prix, Schumacher brothers 1 and 2. That weekend, of course, they lost their mother, and it was a very emotional Grand Prix. I would have gone for the 2006 one. I'm going to go for something different, obviously, because you've mentioned it. But obviously, that was a great race between those two, and a great way to pay tribute to their mother as well. So it was nice for all the right reasons, and a very good race between the two Schumacher brothers at the time when Williams were at their peak, challenging Ferrari, with Ralph and Michael Schumacher going toe to toe in that championship. It was really good to see. The Nurburgring, I'm going to be a bit old fashioned here. I so often am a nostalgic when it comes to Formula One. You know this, Courtney, very much am. But the 1999 Luxembourg Grand Prix, as it was at the time, before it became the German, it was technically in the Luxembourg region at the time. But the famous race where literally everybody was having retirements or making mistakes. Of course, Eddie Irvine having issues, Ralf Schumacher retiring from the league, Coulthard, Hakkinen with the full start, Heinz-Harald Frentzen with issues, which was eventually won by Johnny Herbert in the Stewart. Stewart coming first and third in that race, with Rubens Barrichello coming third respectively. What a classic race that was. And for Johnny Herbert, his final win of his Formula One career, the plucky unsung British hero at the time in the late 90s, before we had the massive influx of British Formula One stars we have today. That was really a special race for Johnny as well. And the Stewart team as well, led by Sir Jackie Stewart as well, 3-time Formula One world champion. Such a memorable, crazy race. I definitely recommend, guys, if you haven't seen that race, definitely go on the Formula One website or F1 TV, look for it and have a look through it. It's a really fun race to watch and a really, really great result nonetheless. And so I think we can call that to an end for a week, guys. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in for this week, and hopefully you can enjoy the British Grand Prix. Once again, obviously plug in the DNF1 Beginner's Guide to Formula One. That's on YouTube. Make sure to check that out. Make sure to like, share and subscribe the video. We worked really hard on that, so we hope that you guys can really enjoy it. And of course, we've got part 2 coming out next Friday on the 7th of August. And until then, make sure to support us on any medium that you do listen to the podcast on. Of course, follow us on Instagram and Twitter as well, which is DNF1_podcast. Some great stuff going on there as well, particularly the Instagram page. Of course, plenty of interesting content going on there. So that's all that there is for this week. I just want to say thank you once again, Courtney, of course, co-hosting this with me once again. Great to have you with us again.
Always a pleasure, mate.
And of course, Luke, thank you for joining us once again on another episode. It's been good having you on. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure also.
And thank you for joining us once again, guys. Hope you enjoyed that episode, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast.
See you soon.